The wind howled outside the small, weathered house on Maple Street, carrying the sharp chill of a late December evening. Inside, the glow of a single lamp illuminated the kitchen where Arthur Grayson sat, his gnarled hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. At 72, Arthur's face bore the lines of a life well lived, but not without its scars. His gray hair, once thick and dark, now thinned at the crown, and his eyes, a faded blue, held a weight that seemed heavier tonight. The phone on the table buzzed, its screen lighting up with a message from his daughter. "Emily. Dad. We're almost there. Can't wait to see you." It read, accompanied by a heart emoji. Arthur's chest tightened. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Trembling, he typed slowly, each letter deliberate, as if carving them into stone. "Don't come to Christmas dinner," he wrote, then hit send before he could second-guess himself. The words stared back at him, cold and final. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, the silence of the house pressing in like a heavy fog. Emily, his only child, was 35 now, married to a kind man named Tom, with 2 kids of their own, Lila, 8, and Max, 5. They lived 3 hours away, close enough for visits, but far enough that each one felt like a small reunion. Arthur had always cherished their time together, especially at Christmas. The holiday had been sacred ever since Emily was a little girl. When they'd decorate the tree with mismatched ornaments and bake gingerbread men that always ended up slightly burnt. Even after her mother, Clara, passed away 10 years ago, they'd kept the tradition alive. But this year was different. This year, Arthur had made a choice. He hadn't told Emily the whole truth. How could he? How do you explain to your daughter that you've invited strangers into your home for Christmas instead of your own family? Not just any strangers, but the kind of people Emily had warned him about, people she'd called trouble when she'd heard about them. The Millers, a family of 4 who'd been evicted from their apartment down the street, had nowhere to go. Arthur had seen them at the community center, their faces drawn with desperation, their 2 kids clinging to their parents' legs. He'd offered his home, his table, his warmth. It wasn't charity. Not realize it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite name but felt in his bones. The decision hadn't come easily. Arthur had spent weeks wrestling with it, torn between his daughter's expectations and the quiet voice in his heart that told him to do what was right. Emily wouldn't understand. She'd always been protective, especially since Clara's death, when she'd taken it upon herself to look after him. She'd call every week, send care packages, and insist he move closer to her. But Arthur was stubborn. This house, with its creaky floors and peeling wallpaper, was where he'd raised his family. It was where Clara's laugh still echoed in his memory. He wasn't leaving. The phone buzzed again. "Dad. What? Why? Is everything okay?" Emily's words were laced with worry. Arthur didn't reply. He couldn't find the words to explain without sounding like he was choosing strangers over his own blood. Instead, he stood and shuffled to the kitchen counter, where he'd laid out ingredients for tomorrow's dinner. A turkey, potatoes, green beans, and a pumpkin pie he'd baked himself, a recipe Clara had perfected. He'd planned to make enough for the Millers and then some, hoping to send them home with leftovers. But now, doubt gnawed at him. Had he made a mistake? The Millers arrived the next morning, just as snow began to dust the ground. John and Maria, both in their early 40s, looked exhausted but grateful. Their kids, Sophie and Ben, were shy, their eyes wide as they took in Arthur's cluttered living room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling faintly, and the smell of roasting turkey filled the air. Arthur welcomed them with a smile, though his heart was heavy with the weight of Emily's absence. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," Maria said, her voice soft but sincere. We didn't know where we'd go this year. It's just Arthur, he replied, waving a hand. And you're welcome here. No one should be alone on Christmas. The day unfolded slowly. John helped Arthur carve the turkey, while Maria set the table with Sophie's help. Ben played with a toy truck Arthur had found in the attic, a relic from Emily's childhood. The house felt alive again, filled with voices and laughter. But Arthur couldn't shake the image of Emily's text. He imagined her at home, confused and hurt, maybe even angry. He'd wanted to call her, to explain. But every time he reached for the phone, his courage faltered. By evening, the meal was in full swing. The Millers shared stories of better times, of holidays when they'd had a home of their own. Arthur listened, nodding, his heart warming at their resilience. But then came a knock at the door, sharp, insistent. Arthur froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The room fell silent. Arthur stood, his knees creaking as he made his way to the door. The knock came again, louder this time, and his heart thudded in his chest. He opened the door to find Emily standing on the porch, her face flushed from the cold, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and worry. Behind her stood Tom, holding Lila and Max by the hands, their small faces bundled in scarves and hats. The snow had thickened, swirling around them like a curtain. Dad, what the hell is going on? Emily's voice was sharp, but it trembled at the edges. You send me a text like that and then don't answer. We drove 3 hours to get here. Arthur's mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced back at the Millers, who sat frozen at the table, their eyes wide with unease. Sophie clutched her mother's arm, and Ben's toy truck lay forgotten on the floor. The warmth of the room seemed to drain away, replaced by a tension that hung heavy in the air. Emily, Arthur started, but she cut him off. Who are these people? She demanded, stepping inside and gesturing toward the Millers. Her voice was loud enough to make Ben flinch. You told us not to come, but you're having Christmas dinner with strangers. They're not strangers, Arthur said, his voice quieter than he intended. They're the Millers. They needed a place to go. Emily. They lost their home. Emily's eyes narrowed. So you chose them over us. Over your grandkids. Her voice cracked, and Arthur saw the hurt in her eyes, raw and unguarded. It cut deeper than any words could. No, it's not like that, Arthur said, his hands raised as if to ward off her anger. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing. Emily's laugh was bitter. Dad, you've been acting strange for months. You don't call as much. You don't visit. And now this. What's going on with you? Tom stepped forward, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. Let's calm down, he said gently. Arthur, maybe you can explain so we can all understand. Arthur nodded, though his throat felt tight. He gestured for Emily and her family to come inside. Out of the cold, the Millers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly unsure whether to stay or leave. Maria started to stand, but Arthur held up a hand. Please, stay, he said. You're my guests. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She and Tom sat at the table, Lila and Max climbing onto their laps. The room was crowded now, the air thick with unspoken questions. Arthur took a deep breath and began to explain. I met the Millers at the community center, he said, his voice steady but soft. They've been through a lot, lost their apartment, their savings. They've got kids. Emily, just like you. I couldn't let them spend Christmas on the street. Not when I have this house, this food, this life. Emily's expression softened slightly, but her eyes still held a flicker of betrayal. You could have told me, she said. You didn't have to shut us out. I didn't want to fight, Arthur admitted. I knew you'd worry. Or you'd try to talk me out of it. You've always been so protective. But I'm not fragile. I'm not done yet. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily looked away. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Arthur could see the wheels turning in her mind. The struggle between her love for him and her frustration. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, but he didn't know how. Maria broke the silence. We're so sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't mean to cause any trouble. We'll go. No, Arthur said firmly. You're staying. This is Christmas. There's enough for everyone. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, they just stared at each other, a lifetime of love and misunderstanding passing between them. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said. But we're staying too. The tension didn't vanish, but it eased, like a knot loosening just enough to breathe. The meal resumed, though the conversation was stilted at first. Lila and Max, oblivious to the adult drama, chattered about their Christmas gifts, and Sophie and Ben soon joined in, their shyness fading. Arthur watched it all, his heart caught between relief and unease. He'd wanted to do something good, to honor Clara's memory by opening his home to those in need. But had he pushed his own family away in the process? As the evening wore on, Emily began to talk to Maria, their voices low but civil. Tom helped clear the plates, and the kids ran off to play in the living room. Arthur sat back, watching the scene unfold, and for the first time that day, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he hadn't ruined everything. Maybe there was still a way to make this right. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the world outside in a quiet hush. Inside Arthur's house, the clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. The kids had migrated to the living room, where Lila was teaching Sophie how to braid a friendship bracelet while Max and Ben built a fort out of couch cushions. Arthur watched them from the kitchen, his heart swelling at the sight. It reminded him of Emily at that age, fearless and full of ideas, always dragging him into her adventures. But the warmth of the moment couldn't erase the tension still simmering between him and Emily. She sat across the table from him, her hands wrapped around a glass of wine, her eyes distant. Tom and John were talking about football, their voices a low rumble, while Maria helped clear the last of the dessert plates. Arthur wanted to say something to Emily, to explain himself fully, but the words felt stuck, like stones in his throat. Dad, Emily said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter. Can we talk? Alone? Arthur nodded, his stomach twisting. He led her to the small den off the kitchen, where Clara's old armchair still sat by the window. The room smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, a ghost of a memory that never faded. Emily closed the door behind them, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the day pressing down. I'm trying to understand, Emily said finally, her voice softer now, but still edged with hurt. I get that you wanted to help the Millers. I do. But why didn't you tell me? Why shut us out? Arthur sank into the armchair, his hands resting on his knees. I didn't want to worry you, he said. You've got enough on your plate, your job. The kids. Tom. I didn't want to add to it. That's not your call to make, Emily said, her voice rising slightly. I'm your daughter. Dad. I want to be there for you, just like you've always been there for me. But you're making it so hard. Arthur looked down at his hands, the knuckles swollen from years of work. He thought of Clara, how she'd always known what to say, how to bridge the gap between hearts. He missed her fiercely in moments like this. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Talking. Explaining. Your mom was the one who could do that. I saw the Millers. And I saw us. Years ago, when we were struggling. Your mom would have opened the door. No question. I wanted to do right by her. Emily's eyes softened, and she knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. Mom would have wanted us here too, she said. She wouldn't have wanted you to push us away. I know, Arthur whispered, his voice thick. I messed up. I thought I was doing something good, but I didn't think it through. I didn't want you to feel like you weren't important. Emily squeezed his hands, her eyes glistening. You're my dad, she said. You're always important. But you have to let me in. You can't just decide what I can handle. They sat there for a moment, the silence between them softer now, less jagged. Outside, the snow continued to fall, muffling the world. Arthur felt a weight lift. Not entirely, but enough to breathe a little easier. He'd made a mistake, but maybe it wasn't too late to fix it. Back in the kitchen, the Millers were preparing to leave. Maria thanked Arthur again, her voice warm with gratitude. You've given us more than a meal, she said. You've given us hope. Arthur smiled, though his heart was still heavy. You're welcome back anytime, he said. This house is too big for just me. As the Millers bundled up their kids and stepped out into the snow, Emily watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Arthur wondered what she was thinking, whether she'd truly forgiven him. He wanted to believe they'd find their way back to each other, but doubt lingered, a quiet ache in his chest. That night, after Emily and her family had gone to bed in the guest room, Arthur sat alone in the living room. The Christmas tree lights cast a soft glow, and he thought of Clara, of the life they'd built together, of the daughter they'd raised. He'd always tried to be a good man, a good father, but tonight he felt the weight of his imperfections. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Emily, though she was just upstairs. I'm sorry, he wrote. I love you. He didn't expect a reply. Not tonight. But as he sat there, the phone buzzed in his hand. I love you too, Dad, Emily wrote. We'll talk more tomorrow. Arthur's eyes stung, and he let out a shaky breath. Tomorrow. There was still tomorrow. Morning broke with a pale gray light filtering through the curtains. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside Arthur's house quiet and still, as if holding its breath. He was up early, as always, brewing coffee in the kitchen while the rest of the house slept. The events of the previous day lingered in his mind, a tangle of guilt and hope. Emily's text from last night had been a lifeline, but he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. There was still so much left unsaid. The smell of coffee drew Emily downstairs, her hair tousled and her eyes heavy with sleep. She wore one of Clara's old sweaters, a faded green thing that Arthur hadn't seen in years. It made his heart ache to see her in it, a piece of her mother wrapped around her. Morning, Dad, she said, her voice soft but guarded. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him at the table. Morning, Arthur replied, studying her face. She looked tired, but there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Sleep okay? Well enough, she said, offering a small smile. The kids were up late, excited about the snow. Arthur nodded, grateful for the small talk, though he knew it was only a prelude. About yesterday. Let's not do this now, she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. The kids will be up soon, and I don't want to start the day heavy. Can we just spend some time together, like we used to? Arthur's throat tightened, but he nodded. I'd like that. The morning unfolded slowly, with a kind of tentative ease. Tom and the kids joined them, and soon the house was filled with the sound of laughter and the clatter of breakfast dishes. Lila and Max begged to go outside and build a snowman. And Arthur found himself bundled up in his old coat, trudging through the snow with his grandkids. Emily and Tom joined them. And for a while, it felt like the old days before Clara's death, before the distance had crept in between them. As they worked, piling snow into lopsided shapes, Emily's laughter rang out, clear and bright. Arthur watched her, his heart swelling. This was what he'd been afraid of losing, not just the holiday, but these moments, these fleeting connections that made life mean something. He wanted to hold on to it, to make it last. But the peace was short-lived. Later that afternoon, as they sat in the living room with mugs of hot cocoa, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face darkened. "Dad," she said, her voice low. "Did you know the Millers are telling people you're letting them stay here? Like, permanently?" Arthur frowned, caught off guard. "What?" "No. I just invited them for dinner. That's all." Emily showed him her phone, where a message from a neighbor read, "Heard you're housing that family from down the street. Hope you know what you're doing." Arthur. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they twisted his intentions into something they weren't. "I didn't say they could stay," Arthur said, his voice firm. "I just wanted to give them a place for Christmas." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, Dad. But you see how this looks, right? People are talking. They think you're taking on more than you can handle." "Let them talk," Arthur said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I don't care what the neighbors think. I did what I thought was right." Emily's eyes searched his, and for a moment, he thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded. "Okay. I worry about you. You're not as young as you used to be." The words hit harder than she probably meant them to. Arthur felt the weight of his age, the creak in his joints, the fatigue that lingered even after a good night's sleep. But he also felt a spark of defiance. "I'm not dead yet, Em," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I've still got some good left in me." She laughed, a small, reluctant sound, and the tension eased again. But Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that he'd opened a door he couldn't close. The Millers, the neighbors, Emily, everything felt tangled, and he wasn't sure how to untie it. That evening, as the kids played and Tom helped with dinner, Arthur slipped out to the porch, needing a moment to think. The air was crisp, the sky a deep indigo. He thought of Clara, of how she'd always known how to balance kindness with practicality. He'd tried to do the same, but he'd stumbled. The question was, could he make it right? The next day brought a fragile calm, like the quiet after a storm. Arthur woke to the sound of Max and Lila giggling in the guest room, their voices carrying through the thin walls. He smiled despite himself, grateful for their presence. But the conversation with Emily lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. The rumor about the Millers staying with him had spread faster than he'd expected, and it gnawed at him. He hadn't meant to cause a stir, hadn't meant to make Emily worry. Yet here they were, caught in a web of misunderstanding. After breakfast, Arthur decided to clear the air. He called John Miller, who answered on the second ring. "Arthur," John said, his voice warm but tired. "We can't thank you enough for what you did. It meant the world to the kids." "I'm glad," Arthur said, hesitating. "But, John, there's something I need to ask. People are saying I'm letting you stay here. Like, long term. I didn't say anything like that. Did I?" There was a pause, and Arthur's heart sank. "No, you didn't," John said quickly. "Maria and I mentioned to a neighbor that you'd been kind to us, and I guess it got twisted. I'm sorry, Arthur. We'll set it straight." Arthur let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's all right," he said. Just wanted to be sure. When he hung up, Emily was watching him from the doorway, her arms crossed. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, Arthur said, nodding. Just a misunderstanding. It's cleared up now. Emily's expression softened, but there was still a question in her eyes. Dad, why is this so important to you? Helping the Millers. I mean, you've never done anything like this before. Arthur leaned back in his chair, searching for the right words. It's not just about the Millers, he said finally. It's about feeling like I still matter. Like I can still do something good in this world. After your mom died, I felt like I was just existing, waiting for the end. But helping them, it made me feel alive again. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she crossed the room to sit beside him. You've always mattered, Dad, she said. To me, to the kids, to Tom. You don't have to prove that to anyone. I know, Arthur said, his voice thick. But sometimes I need to prove it to myself. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. Then Emily reached for his hand, her grip warm and steady. I'm proud of you, she said. I just wish you'd let me in on it. Arthur squeezed her hand, his heart full. I'll do better, he promised. No more secrets. The rest of the day felt lighter, as if a cloud had lifted. They took the kids to the park, where Max and Lila raced through the snow, their laughter echoing. Arthur watched Emily and Tom, their faces bright with love for their children, and he felt a deep gratitude. He'd almost lost this, almost pushed them away. But they were still here, still his. That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Arthur felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The table was crowded with leftovers, the conversation easy and warm. But then came another knock at the door, sharp and unexpected. Arthur's heart sank. He exchanged a glance with Emily, who looked as wary as he felt. He opened the door to find Mrs. Henderson, the neighborhood busybody, standing there with a pinched expression. Arthur, she said, her voice clipped. I hear you're running a halfway house now. We've got rules in this neighborhood. You know. Arthur's jaw tightened. I'm not running anything, he said. I had some folks over for dinner. That's all. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. Well, people are talking. They don't want trouble around here. Those Millers aren't exactly upstanding citizens. That's enough, Emily said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm but firm. My dad was being kind. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you should look at your own heart. Mrs. Henderson blinked, clearly taken aback. She muttered something about just looking out for the neighborhood and left, her footsteps crunching in the snow. Arthur turned to Emily, his eyes wide. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yeah, I did, Emily replied, a spark of defiance in her eyes. No one gets to talk about my dad like that. Arthur's chest swelled with pride, but also with a pang of regret. He'd brought this on himself, hadn't he? By opening his door, he'd opened himself up to judgment. But as he looked at Emily, standing tall and fierce, he knew he'd do it again. Some things were worth the trouble. The final day of Emily's visit dawned bright and cold, the snow sparkling under a clear sky. Arthur woke with a sense of resolve. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotion, anger, guilt, love, and everything in between. But they'd come through it. He and Emily, stronger than before. He wanted to hold on to that, to make it last. As they packed up to leave, Emily lingered in the kitchen, her hands busy with dishes, but her mind clearly elsewhere. Dad, she said finally, I've been thinking. Maybe we should come up more often. Not just for holidays. The kids love it here. And I miss you. Arthur's heart skipped a beat. I'd like that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. This house is too quiet without you. Emily smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached her eyes. And maybe next time, you can tell me if you're planning to save the world, she teased. Arthur chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Deal. As they loaded the car, Lila and Max hugged him tightly, their small arms wrapping around his waist. Come back soon, he said, ruffling their hair. Tom shook his hand, his grip firm and warm. Thanks for everything, Arthur, he said. You're a good man. Emily was the last to say goodbye. She hugged him fiercely, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. I love you, Dad, she whispered. Don't ever forget that. I won't, Arthur said, his voice breaking. I love you too. As their car pulled away, Arthur stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared around the corner. The house felt empty again, but not as heavy as before. He'd made mistakes, but he'd also made a difference not just for the Millers, but for himself and Emily. He'd learned something about family, about kindness, about the courage it took to open your heart, even when it hurt. Later that day, Arthur got a call from John Miller. We found a place, John said, his voice bright with relief. A shelter downtown. But it's a start. We wanted to thank you again, Arthur. You gave us more than a meal, you gave us a chance to believe things could get better. Arthur's eyes stung, and he blinked hard. You're welcome, he said. Take care of those kids. When he hung up, he sat in Clara's armchair, the one by the window, and looked out at the snow-covered street. He thought of the Christmas dinner, of the Millers' gratitude, of Emily's fierce defense of him. He thought of Clara, and how proud she'd been not just of him, but of the family they'd built. Tears welled up, and for the first time in years, Arthur let them fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something deeper, a mix of regret and gratitude, of love and loss. He'd opened his home to strangers, and in doing so, he'd found his way back to his daughter. He'd faced judgment, but he'd also found forgiveness. And in the quiet of his empty house, Arthur Grayson felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Emily. Safe travels, he wrote. Come back soon. This old man's got more Christmases to share. The reply came almost instantly. We will, Dad. Promise. Arthur smiled, his heart full. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road worth traveling. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking it alone.